Well, good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to How to Be a Virtual Meeting Virtuoso. My name is Carolyn Kane, and I'm Assistant Director of Alumni Relations here at DePaul. I'm so glad so many of you are able to join us this afternoon. And now I would like to introduce Cyndi Maxey, who is a national speaker, author, and coach based in Chicago. She helps clients design and deliver presentations that drive performance in and outside the classroom, boardroom, meeting, or event. Together, she has uncovered the importance of personal presence for executives, doctors, nurses, trainers, educators, scientists, middle managers, technical experts, real estate managers, medical office managers, truck part distributors, firefighters, and more. Along the way, she has co-authored 6 books on communication and presentation skills and joined the College of Communication as a part-time professor here at DePaul. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Cyndi Maxey.
Oh, thank you, Carolyn and Nick, for setting this up today. And I want to thank all of you for choosing me as your distraction in this newsy week. The title is How to Be a Virtual Meeting Virtuoso. And when I think of virtuoso, I don't know why, but I think of a great violinist. But the term virtuoso actually does apply to excellence in the fine arts. So you might be thinking, well, okay, we're not all in the fine arts. No, we're not, but we do all attend meetings, or at least I assume that might be one reason you're with me on this call today. And in itself, a meeting is a little bit of a theatrical production. We are all players the minute we enter the room. And nowadays, the room tends to be virtual. So this program is less about managing the technology and more about managing the self. So it occurred to me last spring as I was working through one of my first classes here that was online. So last spring, I was thinking about the classes that I was teaching for the first time online. And I got inspired to write an article about how our communication skills are showing no matter what. I don't know about you, but I had spent a lot more time on my laptop than I ever had before, working with students here at DePaul who were also unaware of it, of the time that they would be spending. And so I have that as kind of a theme today. I'm sure that you, in your experience with working a lot more online, may have some similar thoughts. So not long ago, I was talking with a client of mine, and she had been on her first triathlon. And we were talking about it. She said the biking was okay, the running was okay, but she said, I got to the swimming, and I knew that people swam on top of each other and were very close. I was ready for that, but I wasn't ready for the cold water of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, where it was held. And then we kind of smiled because our topic that day was very similar to the one we're talking about now, and that is how to lead a better meeting. We were smiling because actually we never know when something is going to happen. Just did to me here. We can plan ahead and still be thrown by some of the things that can happen, especially with virtual meetings. So my first tip, I have little margin tips along the way. And my first little margin tip is, if you end up in cold water when you didn't expect it, apologize quickly and move on. Don't drown in the problem. My first rule in problem solving is, if you can quickly solve it yourself, great. Second is ask for help. And third is make sure you have some kind of backup where you could present the program without it. So all of that in mind, what I want to go to next is an agenda today. And the agenda kind of covers the basics of leading a virtual meeting like a virtuoso. We'll talk about first impressions and the importance of them, how to shine when it's your turn to present, and then we'll move into, in the second half, a little bit more about managing participants with caring leadership. and using a classic agenda and ground rules in new ways in a virtual environment. Overall, I firmly believe that our communication skills are showing every step of the way, and that we need to play our part with professionalism, whether a participant, a presenter, or a host. So I'll be referring to all three of those roles throughout the program today. There's something else that I was thinking about when I wrote the article this spring, which, by the way, we have a copy for you of at the end of the program. And that was that there are three kind of themes that are showing when we're online. The first one being how we use time, the second one being how we listen, and the third one I just kind of put under the umbrella of how we care. All of those things are still very possible to be seen. I want to start with first impressions. So, you know, I'm a communication studies person, prof here, and I was in graduate school too. And I remember being intrigued by the lecture on initial interaction. Initial interaction is all of the theory around the judgments we make about each other when we're first meeting. And it could be looked at as first impressions as well. So first impressions really are invariably right and difficult to change. And so let's keep that in mind. I'm going to start you even before you get to the meeting. And I'm going to start you with the email that responds to the meeting. So let's say someone invites you to a meeting and you put it in your calendar. And let's say you have a question about the meeting. That's your first opportunity then to use basic email skills, which are, you know, subject line, greeting, short body, carrying clothes, and asking specifically what you want. And you all might be thinking, oh yeah, well, you know, we've known that for quite a while, but it's doing it, that's another thing. It's really important that we do those things, and we keep in mind that the person who we're responding to is busy. So if you want to send an email, making sure that you have all those. And I have a couple of, here's margin tip number 2. With the greeting, all you really need to put is the person's name. You don't need a dear Cyndi, just a Cyndi is okay as long as it's there. And in the closing, you can put a thanks, Cyndi. I'm not a huge fan of a popular closing that I notice my students and clients using. It's the word best. To me, that sounds a little bit abrupt. And also, not a real fan of there's kind of a standard close. I think it might pop up with, I'm traveling right now, please forgive the short response. To me, that's sending a first impression that whatever they're doing is more important than what my meeting is about. So moving on now from emails. Emails are the first impression, how we show caring, how we show listening, and how we also respect the other person's time. This next thing I like to call little things are big. So I'd like to talk about these both with respect to the host and to the participant. Of course, you all probably know that setting up a Zoom meeting in advance is highly recommended. And you kind of look at things like lighting when you're the host, and you check things out if you're lucky enough, like I am today, to have a helper, check things out with how you're going to manage the chat box, how you're going to, that's a big thing. I want to just talk about chat box. Don't let it become more than it is. Like just a little bit ago, Carolyn said that she would be taking questions through the chat box. And that's perfect. I don't really want to see it in this particular format. If we had a smaller group and a little bit more casual weekly meeting kind of thing, I might open that chat box up. But those rules are important. Don't assume that everyone knows what the rules are. The basic choices are at the bottom. So that's part of what the host sets up, that little things that are big and show a host's ability to communicate, communication skills. The participant also can arrive early, unless you're in a waiting room, as you all were today. If you're not in a waiting room and can get on, that's a great time to flick on the video and say hello. I have one student this term who does that every Every Zoom, he's the first one on. And it works to his benefit because I remember his name and who he is. And also if he's able to exchange a little bit of conversation, which in our college students today is not as easy as it used to be because they're not as, they don't participate as much in face-to-face speaking, and especially not now during our COVID environment. So early arrival, a little thing, but big so many times. Conversational ability, any chance you can help the host by greeting others. You know, I've been talking about this since the beginning of my career when the guy I was working for at the time really had me get involved in associations, and I would come early and I'd notice there'd be a membership table and there'd be someone working the membership table, and that's how I would get involved. I would help that person and eventually end up getting more involved in the Association of Talent Development, the National Speakers Association. And that's so important also in the virtual world. Just because we're on an electronic piece of equipment doesn't mean we can't do all these things. Couple other things there that are little things that are big, and one is body posture and neckline and headgear. You can see as you look at me today, what we're trying to create here is somewhat the look of our newscasters, in that my eyes should be about 2/3 from the bottom. Neckline should be professional. I've got a little bit of a scarf on today, sometimes a simple piece of jewelry or a simple watch. All of that kind of thing can be very, very nice in setting your personality. But also headgear. Our students at DePaul love to wear caps and hoodies, and in our casual conversations, that's okay. But for what I like to talk about is if you have a webinar or a specific work meeting, to always look nice from the top up. Years ago, research proved that that comes through in our voice anyway. If we are dressed in a way that we feel good about, that will come through vocally. So little things are big, and I start there because first impressions are hard to change. So whatever is in your background, and you may need to actually present in a bedroom, then smooth the bed, hide the pillows, keeping it as professional as you possibly can. Lighting is important. You may know by now that we don't want light coming in behind us because that darkens the look. And right now I have a side lamp right here that's coming from the side, and I have sunlight and overhead coming from above. So that combination of the side light and then the light coming from above then creates the amount of light that I need. Definitely don't want light coming in from behind us. Last, notes placement, which I'm experimenting with too, but the notes that you use, if you're using some kind of a paper note in addition to what's on the computer, the notes that you use should be readable so that your eyes don't have to go very far from the camera. So my camera is right here, attempting to look at that most of the time as a virtual presenter. My notes are right here, and I've kind of got them standing up against something so that I'm not fiddling with them a lot. Another place for notes would be about here so that I can look at you out there and then look down at them as well. So what have I been talking about so far? Pretty much first impressions, because they're so important. And guess what? They involve what we all dislike doing, and that's planning ahead, preparing ahead, thinking about what's ahead. And we have a term that we talk about in my classes called chronemics when we're talking about nonverbal communication. Chronemics is how we use time. And all of that is set up not only in the opening, but throughout a virtual presentation. It's really important that I know how to use time. So right now we've been together just over 15 minutes. I need to be aware of that. I don't want to apologize about time. You don't want to over refer to time. This is what I hear all the time at meetings. I hear, well, this is kind of boring, but I know that, I know I need to get through it. Or I'm sorry, I'm going to take a little bit of overtime. Or one time I was speaking at a large event and the president of the association went first and he went over. And then the person who came up after him, who was going to set the tone for the whole day, also went over. So the whole day of the conference got rebooted. Same thing can happen with virtual presentation. If one person goes over, the whole thing is affected, like a little domino effect. So margin tip number 3, although it's probably written down somewhere, is be very honoring of your time. Don't apologize about time, but use it to the best you can and be aware of everyone else on the line with you. I wrote most of my books with a co-author, and he taught me a lot about time because he was always early. We would be off speaking around the nation, and I'd come down from my hotel room at different times of across the country, different time zones, and Kevin would always be there bright and early. And I said, "You are so great with being at places early, and it says so much." And he said, "Yeah, well, I figure that if I'm late, I'm sending the message that something else is more important." So I want to say now too that in your company or your organization, if people or if you are someone who typically arrives late for meetings, that's sending a message that something else was more important. Granted, it might be something that wasn't your fault, but that's something to talk to the host about if it happens frequently. And it's something that I think we can get better at. Okay, so let's move on now to objective number 2, which is to shine when it's your turn to present. So far, I've been talking about things that apply to both the participant and the host, but let's talk now about being the speaker, like being me today. There's Zoom fatigue out there. In fact, some of the fun, more like happy hour reunion type Zooms aren't even happening as much in my world because people are just kind of zoomed out. And I'm only using Zoom as one of, there are many companies out there who are doing online kinds of things. And Zoom is just one that I happen to use frequently. But, it's hard because on Zoom, like I can't tell right now who's smiling, who's laughing, who's might be taking a few notes, who's just kind of sitting back and soaking it in, etc., who's looking for what happened to which child or which dog, but it's very hard to see that. And yet I noticed that Zoom stocks are up. So we're gonna have to be working with this kind of a system for quite a while. So let's talk about a few things that I think are very important, at least are for me. What we want when we're presenting, whether we were asked to present or whether we're in charge of the team and we must present as part of our job every week or month or whatever, we want a smooth, put together report. We don't want a report filled with ums and ahs. Like that. And the only way we get that is practice. Sorry, but it is true. It's going over what we're going to say. So let's talk about a few other things I see that can be corrected. One is a quick pace. In this format, things are a little faster. Slides are a little more meaningful because we're not face-to-face. These slides, by the way, I designed using the design feature in the new 365 Microsoft package. And so it has a lot of nice options on there, not only for templates like this one, but also for photos and clip art. And that you only get, I believe, I've been told, with the latest package, which is, you have to pay for that. But this is another way you can present, by the way, using slides horizontally instead of bullet points in a list. I wanted to give you a couple of examples of that today. If there is a problem with the other problem other than filler words is rushing and reading things. For some reason, I think people really feel they need to rush, and it might be that we can't see each other too well. So you want to avoid meandering fillers. You can always ask a trusted friend or significant other, whoever's in your bubble, how many ums you're saying, how many uhs. In class, what we do is an exercise where students raise their hand every time they hear an or a like, and you can't get rid of them. It just happens in pausing in between, usually in between slides. Plan ahead for questions, and I already said no apologies. Had an interesting experience at a meeting not long ago where a really great, very knowledgeable presenter was presenting. I thought maybe a little too fast, but a lot of stuff, a list of 10. Of course, I'm thinking that's probably not a good idea, a list of 10. And that person is presenting pretty fast, this list of 10. And I'm just kind of starting to not pay attention when, boom, all of a sudden he puts up a short video he made to illustrate what he was talking about. Just a little 2 or 3 minute video. Boom, I'm listening right away. And, we can make videos pretty easily given the software that we have with the learning management systems that we have and other systems. And that's really what we needed. So if I'm learning one thing about lists of, I've always talked about no lists of 10. Lists of 10 are hard for all of us. The other thing is a little pet peeve of mine is keeping a cover slide up too long. I tried to get rid of mine a little faster today and it wouldn't let me. But the reason is the audience is looking at that cover slide. That's distracting them. So don't keep it up too long. You can also always use black and just black out the slide. I'm using, by the way, I'm presenting with a remote so that I don't have to keep leaning in to my system. This is a remote that I love. It costs, I've had it for years, it costs about $80. And it makes presenting from my laptop a little less involving moving in to do things. Here are 2 things I talk about too, and they also apply in the virtual world. This is what the audience sees and what the audience hears. So what the audience sees is your eyes. Eyes really are very, very important and still important in virtual meetings. Here's something that's gaining importance, and that's what I'm doing right now, using your hands. Be careful that you don't over gesture to compensate, but hands are noticed. Also, to go along with that, how your nails are done are noticed, and any jewelry that you have around your arms is noticed. So hands can be very energizing, and their gestures are also very good for getting rid of nervousness because they give you something to do. Posture has changed a bit. You can speak standing up if you like. You just have to be careful you're not looking down. You always want to make sure your laptop is even, if you have to stack it on books or whatever, but is even with your eyes. So the audience is looking at that, and these are things to keep in mind. Right now, I am using a pretty sitting up posture, and I do that when I'm in charge of a meeting, for sure. The minute you begin to lean back and do this kind of thing, even in the little square, it still looks a little too nonchalant, or sometimes it can actually look kind of dominating. It depends on if you're smiling or not, I guess. All right, and then what the audience hears. Volume is so important. To talk about that a little bit more in a bit. You must be heard. The microphones that come with the computer are sometimes great and sometimes not. So I would say speaking up is important. And I would say keep your pace flowing, but please don't rush. I'll show you right now the difference. The difference of rushing is right now, if I would say, okay, here are 3 things that you need to remember: volume, pace, and pause. That's too fast. That just sounds nervous and rushed. But the other way to do it, which would be a kind of a sparkly rate, would be to go about like this. So remember that volume, pace, and how you use pause, all 3 of those things are very important. All right, so we're going to pause just for a minute now, and I'm going to see if you have any questions out there. But what I'll wrap this little section up with is all of these things show your charisma and your credibility. Aristotle wrote about ethos, logos, and pathos, logic, appeal to audience, and character. And that's really what we're talking about. All of these things together combine to make you, me, and those of us given the job of presenting more believable, and also just sort of having more charisma and fun to listen to. So I'll just stop there a minute and see if there's anything that I can answer. Any questions?
Okay. Cyndi, can you see me?
Pardon?
Can you see me?
Yes, now I can.
Perfect. I'm back now. Let's see. We have a few questions that came in so far. The first one is, can you talk about the usefulness of ring lighting?
Just barely. I think it is being considered as a great way to light your face really well. I have one. I've played with it a little bit, and what you have to do is just make sure that you set it so what has happened with my students and colleagues who have it is it can cause glare on those people who wear glasses, so they have to kind of figure out, because it's such a bright light. Right now, I have kind of a version of that I'm using, and we were playing around with it earlier today, and we found a spot that was a little too bright. It was glaring in my eyes instead of just giving me the light I wanted. But it does seem to be something that people are seeing as a great thing to have to use from home. We have to kind of play around with how we use it.
Okay. Someone wants to know, they host many virtual meetings and they're looking for interaction like games, polls, etc. What apps or games can you conduct live during Zoom calls?
The easiest, and to me, one of the most effective ways of using, and I'll say using Zoom, is the breakout room. Because the breakout room can happen in all different numbers. You can break out into partners of 2. Just the other day, I had students break into partners of 2 and share with each other this little activity. When they arrive from class, back from class today, and there was a text waiting for them from someone, who would you like it to be from and why? And so that brought in. That was just kind of a personal thing. Well, that was a group of 2. And then I think after that, I moved pretty quickly into a group of 4 or 5, where one person is presenting to the rest of the breakout group, and the rest of the breakout group is providing feedback. One time when I did a breakout group, and by the way, when I talk about breakout groups, if you're not aware, it's simply an icon that's available in the kind of the dock of the Zoom system. And it's very easy to just open and set up with the number of groups you want for the number of people you want. So that's what I'm going to do. I really like. I'm never really been, to answer your question, I've never really been a real games person. I always thought that just discussions and like I just mentioned to you, was a little bit more authentic to use with learners. However, there are a lot of resources out there about learning games that are really very good, I'm sure. To give you one more thing then, or to review how I use games, would be so far using breakout rooms of different sizes with different purposes. I also don't want my students or my participants to think, oh boy, another breakout room, and no, we're going to have to do the same thing every time. I like to keep a little more guessing about it. So the next, this will be a class I have next week. We're going to break into groups of 2, and we are going to talk about the name, the meaning of their name. Did they have a nickname? Where did their name come from? How do they feel about the name? How about pronouncing the name? And then we're going to work that into the topic of influence or persuasion. So I really think that's how I would answer your question about games.
Okay, someone wants to know, are there clothing colors or patterns to use or avoid? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, the one to avoid is actually white because you'll tend to blend in a little bit too much with some of your settings. I use black a lot because it is, I guess, it doesn't draw attention to it. I would say take a look at your background. I would start there. Look at what's behind you, and you want to stand out from that. I mean, we've been doing that for years as speakers. We want to. Sometimes I used to even ask my client, "What color is the curtain in the auditorium?" And if it's royal blue, I don't think I want to wear my royal blue jacket. So I think the rule of thumb is stay with solids as opposed to prints, only because they blend a little bit better, a little easier on the eye. That being said, I've got a real pretty print, a spring scarf that I'll pull out sometimes. And I've got a white wall behind me, so I can play around with that a little bit. The main thing about dress really is neckline, making sure that you're comfortable with it. Men, women, all genders, are you comfortable with how high it is and what it says about you?
Okay, we'll ask one more question and then we'll ask more at the end. The other question was, how do I practice not reading my notes?
Yeah. I'll tell you what it's about. It's about not, it's about pausing and vocal variety. So looking at your notes and then actually marking with a slash mark or a highlighter where you're going to pause instead of reading. None of us sound good when we're reading. We just sound boring. We do. If we're just reading something straight. So I like to coach speakers and talk about as to do your presentation as if you were having coffee or, I don't know, a drink of some kind with a friend, and you're just telling them about it, about what you're going to talk about, and that'll keep it more conversational. Actually, the activity we're going to do in class coming up next week at DePaul is I'm going to have them do breakout groups, and I'm going to give them a few minutes to look at their speech, and then they have to put it away and they have to do the speech, a 3-minute version by heart based on questions their group asked them. So that makes you think about how you would just talk about this if all of your notes flew away in the wind. Shall I go on? Shall I move on with the program?
Yeah, and then I have a couple really good questions that we'll pick up with at the next session.
Yeah, we'll stop again before we end.
Perfect.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, everybody, for your questions. Happy to have them. All right, so what we were just talking about before I braked was a version of what we would do if and when, hopefully we're back in a live room again. When a speaker enters a room, whether it be virtual or live, the speaker is thinking, the professional is thinking about where will I present, where will I be before I present, and where will I look first, and what will be my first words. There are 2 reasons for this. 1, it makes you look super professional. And 2, it takes away your nerves a little bit. It makes you think about what you're going to be doing. Sitting in the room, whatever practice you've done, it's too late to do more. Put the notes away and just simply think about, okay, I also like to, when I'm presenting at a conference, I like to be in the room listening to the speaker before me in that room so I can get a feeling of the ambiance of the room. And you can certainly do that online too. You can listen to whoever gave the report before you really carefully, and it would look really cool if you would maybe mention something that they mentioned. Like, I really liked the way Carolyn introduced blah, blah, blah. That shows that you listened as well. Know your first 4 minutes, Cole. What I practiced today the most was the opening, about what the meaning of the word virtuoso. We've talked already about notes and how to use them. I I think the main problem I see with clients and students is too much in front of them, too many notes. We should, when we're up in front, or when we're just like this, I'm not up in front, but I'm certainly not reading anything word for word either, because I don't want to give that style to you. We don't want everything. We don't want all the words in front of us unless we're doing some kind of high-level interpretation or reading from a very important book or something like that, some quote. So key phrases, bullet points. What I learned from one of my co-authors was just stand up there with a half page of paper. That makes you cut it down pretty quickly. And large font that you can see. And slides, as I said, are used more now, or they're more important now in this venue than they were. Slides were changing quite a bit anyway. They were much less just words. Slides were and are becoming more visual. So these would have to be the three main challenges I see as a coach that I'm working on. This person is either trying to say too much, too fast, and they're too apologetic. No, don't say, I'm sorry, this is boring, or I know you're all in a hurry. No, we have to be the cheerleaders for our own information and convey that we are excited about it. So those would probably be the things that I work on the most. This woman, Patsy Rodenberg, wrote a fabulous book called The Right to Speak, all about our voice. And she's British. And the thing is, we all have a really great voice, but we often don't know how to use it correctly and well. I'm a member of SAG-AFTRA. I've done voiceover work in my stellar career. And anyway, I learned a lot about how lazy we can be with our voice and how creative we can be with our voice. And it involves attention to, for one thing, using a standing voice, speaking up, speaking out. I see that problem a little bit more with women. And keeping in mind that we have a dynamic, confident sound that we have to be able to use, or we're going to sound, I'll do monotonous for you. We're going to sound monotonous and boring if we read our material like this. Nobody can do that well. It's all the same. So those are things that I work with speakers. Practice reading a poem, or the poem in the Sunday New York Times is a great one to read out loud. They're always fabulous. It's a great way to practice with your voice. So those were the first two topics, first impressions and speaking. And I'm now going to move into a little bit on how to lead a meeting, how to interact through a specific task. So a meeting, the reason for a meeting is to bring a group of people together to accomplish a specific task. And it's harder than it looks. It's harder than it looks. You sometimes have two different people doing these two things, but most of us have to do both of these things when we're in charge of a meeting. Certainly a teacher or a professor or an instructor or a trainer has to do these things. A presenter is presenting the information dynamically, is delivering it, and is communicating clearly. The facilitator is making learning easy, is contributing selectively, is listening and observing, and is maintaining the climate. You may need to tell your group which role you're going to play in the meeting, or you may need to say, I'm going to present some things, and then I'd like to hear your side. So it's up to the person hosting the meeting as to how all of that happens. And listening live is something that I've talked about with facilitating, the skill of facilitating or making the group come alive and be involved. Listening live can mean a lot of things. To me, it means really listening, really hearing what the other people have to say. It means turn taking. That sometimes can be hard in a virtual room. Turn taking is actually a communication term where we set up who's going to talk next. And it's tricky because we interrupt each other. So one way to avoid that in a virtual meeting, I've just got some ideas here that I've seen work. One way is to say their name before you contribute. Carolyn, thank you for that. I've got another idea. Just something as simple as that. Again, we already talked about use that chat box constructively. If you're looking at what's going on in the chat box, we can't multitask very well. So that's actually a great thing to give to someone else other than you. Just ask somebody to watch the comments in the chat box for you. You might have to set them up then. I think you might have to set them up as a co-host to do that. Discussion boards, discussion forums are used a lot, at least in academia, and there are so many wonderful ways to begin a discussion board response. And by the way, I want to pay a compliment to our students. They are really good at this. They're really great at responding in writing on the discussion forums. That a discussion forum is just kind of a group feedback communication around a topic. So right now they're having a forum around the rhetorical style of the presidential candidates because it's so timely. And to respond, they're so great. I really give them compliments on that. And to tune in to both the facts and the feelings is very important, I think, especially virtually. So maybe something like, Cyndi, you seem to feel strongly about that. Or, Joe, I was noticing that you've now mentioned that a few times at this meeting. You want to fill us in. So we have our communication skills are showing. They are there, just like they would be in a group, a group therapy session or something. We can tell if people are listening to us or not. And that is with or without the video. When we're on video, which, by the way, I meant to say earlier, if you're hosting a meeting, please let participants know, as Carolyn did today, whether they'll be on video when they arrive and whether they'll be on audio, and how they can change those settings themselves or not. That's all part of this etiquette. And that sets up for you kind of the ground rules. We used to put ground rules on a flip chart with magic marker. Now we can just set them up at the beginning of the meeting with a slide or not. Or we can ask the group, what are some ground rules you feel are very important about this meeting? Not long ago, I worked with a New York ad agency on these kinds of skills, a really dynamic, up and coming group of people. And one of their basic problems was, they weren't afraid to speak up. They were marketing types. But when the higher level people walked in the room, everybody clammed up. And so that can happen also virtually. And it's important that, especially the host who's watching those things, does a little bit of encouragement there. I'll show you a few ideas. So here's some probe and paraphrase, which you probably have seen before. But you know what? I don't hear this much on the meetings I attend. I think we can do more of checking back in with each other in a discussion. A meeting doesn't have to be just report. And I'll tell you this, you're not going to get a lot of participation if you give a report and then you do this. Any questions? That's not going to work. There have to be other ways at getting at how people feel about it. Maybe go into breakout groups and respond and bring it back to the large group. Or you have to encourage by saying, I'm really interested in which part of my report you found especially timely. Could a few of you give me some feedback on if you think this might work in your department? You have to do that to encourage people, especially virtually. That's never been easy. But any questions is never going to work. Just trust me on that. So meeting balances structure and interaction, both. Meetings without leadership and structure are going to shift topics once a minute unless there's specific goals and an agenda to keep them focused. So I do want to just review for you, an agenda is important. It sounds so classic and rather mundane, but without an agenda, things just kind of go to pot. I know in our department at DePaul, I know our chair is very good about listing the agenda ahead of time. We get an agenda. Bless you. We get an agenda and we know what the basic things are. And if it changes, she lets us know. So there's an unsolicited compliment to her for that. But we all need to do that, even if it's just a 3-point agenda. I'll never forget, years ago, I was selling communication services, and I was with my contact in HR, a lovely young woman. She said, well, we need to put this in front of the president. And I said, okay. And she said, but I'll tell you one thing, he doesn't allow any meetings without a 3-point agenda. You have to prove that you have that and hand it to him when you arrive. I thought, wow, that is such a cool thing. And I did. I was a little nervous. I hadn't met with many presidents at that point. But he did. He said, well, good, very friendly, great tone, and your agenda is, I handed him a piece of paper. That's how we should think about agendas. Without an agenda, where are we headed? We even have an agenda today. So thinking about how you're going to set any ground rules. Do you need ground rules? Are the ground rules, I suggest that you have something around how you're going to use the chat box, and something around how you may or may not use breakout rooms, and something around using the little hand raising emoji. And if you want people to interact, let them know right away, because they're going to guess that you're just going to talk and then say any questions. So if you want more than that, you have to let people know. I just see this happening. I see it in myself as well. So yeah, these are just some sample questions, a sample agenda here, which I'm going to move through and let you take a look at later. I mostly today wanted to stress, have an agenda, even if it's just 3 points, because that way that gives you a little roadmap. So you can also even ask about the agenda before you begin. That's really gutsy. You know, what do you like about what's not on here that should be? And we need to do that in the virtual meeting as well. A couple more things about involving people and managing participants. If you give them anything to do, so earlier I mentioned giving people a breakout room discussion point, and we do that sometimes with our department meetings too. We're broken out into groups of 4 or 5 to discuss things. Keep the setup really clear and simple. Maybe even have a slide for it. I learned the hard way on this. I'll never forget one conference. I threw out directions for something too quickly, and people in the back are going, what are we supposed to do? What? So keeping the setup very clear. The reason you see some scuba divers there, because the story I'm reminded of is when my husband and I were in learning snorkeling off the Keys a long time ago. Included was the snorkeling equipment instead, and instructions on snorkeling. So I thought, okay, great. This is going to be great. We're great at that. Anyway, the instructions on snorkeling were as follows: spit in your mask and jump in. So I was pretty nervous about that. I made it through, but the setup, people, especially adults, want to know clearly, if you break them out, if you teach them, if you're wanting them to do something, how to do it has to be really clear. Here's another thought that, again, I used one session where I was desperate to get people to participate. And I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to ask for the most experienced person in the room to come up. We were in a live room at the time. And the least, who had the most years with the company, the least years with the company, and middle years with the company. And I just started asking them questions that pertained to the topic, probably some communication topic. And of course, it went great, because the whole company is looking at people they know. So you can do that in a virtual setting too, very easily. You can you can have breakouts of that. You can just simply, if you've got everybody in little boxes in front of you, you can say, okay, I'd like to, who's got the most years with the organization? Can I just hear from you? You can't think and hit at the same time. If you get difficult questions that you weren't prepared for, here's what I suggest that you do. And this is just general handling difficult questions rules, but agree with anything you can, recognize that you've heard it. That's certainly a valid point of view. That's clearly a concern. I appreciate your honesty. Thank you for that thought. I don't hear a lot of that going on out there when difficult things come up, and that's so important, especially virtually. In my classes at DePaul, the students have to do this after their persuasive talk, take some difficult questions, and they're not real experienced with this skill. You should know that. Agreeing with what they can, appreciating the perspective, and then either offering the solution or not. So as I'm moving toward the last piece here, I wanted to share with you, I did some interviews back from my last book, which is called Fearless Facilitation. And I interviewed a musician, a comedian, and a 91-year-old. And I asked them, what tips would you give just based on, what you know about being successful in front of a group of people. And the magician said, well, know my beginning and my end and improvise a lot in between. The comedian said, really edit down my act, choose really my most certain material. And the 91-year-old, who happened to be my father at the time, he was in assisted living. And I said, Dad, what really makes us successful? I see you have speakers come in, and what makes them successful for you? Or what do you like about them? And he said, oh, I don't know. They get in the way of our bingo game. So keep in mind, we may think we know a lot about the topic, but we got to remember our audience may need some help appreciating that. So I want to begin my conclusion by just mentioning a great closing at the end of every email of a financial planner I know, when he says, thank you very much, and let me know if you need anything else at all. That's what he puts at the end of every email. I just really like that. I think we can all do that more, like asking people in our meetings, what more would you like to know? I try to encourage questions among my students, and that's hard for them to write back to the professor, but we all can do that in our corporate life all the time. So where have we been today? We've talked about first impressions, initial interaction. We've talked about how to present, so you shine when you present. We've talked a bit about meeting management, just kind of in general, the basic things, and then ended talking about some possibilities for involving people and things to keep in mind when it's just us with a group of people who want to communicate with us. You're seeing now a photo of my 4-year-old birthday party. I'm in the middle with a pout. And I present this to you because I don't think I like those bunny hats. But when I look back on it, I sure wish I had been able to smile through those bunny hats, because it was my party. It was my party, and I really should have made the best of it. And when you're presenting or hosting a meeting, remember it's your party, and you're the cheerleader for your own success if you follow all of these things. So I'm going to close there. Our communication skills are always showing, and that's the beautiful thing. There is my DePaul email if any of you would care to comment to me directly. And I know that Carolyn may have a few more questions here. We have some minutes left for those.
Hi, Cyndi. Yes, we had a few questions come in.
Okay.
Let me go ahead and see. Someone said, do you have suggestions for how to increase participation of those attending a meeting or presentation? It's challenging without being able to read the body language or cues from those attending the meetings. Any thoughts?
Oh, that's so important, isn't it? So I am going to say that person needs some encouragement, but don't overdo it. I would just say, if I knew that person and if I had kind of a question that was not real threatening, I might say something like, Carolyn, I noticed that your team blah, blah, blah lately. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? or Cyndi, it's good to see you today. How's it going with the blah, blah, blah? You give them something that will bring them in that's non-threatening and easy. That might also be a great thing to plan in advance. That would be another thing you could do is email them in advance if you know they're coming and say, I'd love to get your take on blah, 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 what we're doing next week with the blah, blah, blah. Would you be willing to comment a little bit, just impromptu? I think like I say, we're not going to get very far ever if we just say any questions, but we have to figure that out differently. But thank you for that question.
Okay. Someone wants to know, do you have recommendations for best books to look at for tips, like what you've mentioned here, specifically looking for ideas for engaging students, perhaps things beyond breakout rooms or different ways of using them effectively?
You know what? I don't have one hot off the press, but I've got a bookshelf full of them over the years because there's been so much written about games and interactive activities. And there probably has been more here. I would refer this question, though, to the Association for Talent Development. That was a kind of a lifelong association of mine. I've also published with them. They have a huge publishing house there and library and recommendations for books that have to do with learning. Again, my way of involving people is almost always through questions, discussions, small groups. I guess in a classroom, I'd call it small groups. I might call it, I might bring in something for them to react to. But personally, I don't use gamey kind of things very often, but that society has. That's where I got all of my books about it. Games Trainers Play was one of them, I think by Mel Silberman. They're just a lot there. So the Association for Talent Development, I would recommend.
Okay. I'm gonna do a few more for the time. Someone wants to know, is your presentation based upon school instructions only or for interviews as well? If so, could you expand on manipulating the Excel spreadsheet in Zoom meetings and showing a movie or slide? Or like, how can you take over the host desktop?
Wow, I hear a lot there.
Okay. There was a lot in one here. How about
is that one question, Carolyn, or is that a lot of?
Yeah, it was one, but I think it was just more so, is this strictly for school or can this be used for an interview as well?
Oh, a lot of these skills can be used in an interview. Yes, absolutely. All of the delivery about presenting for good first impressions and how you're responding to questions and practicing what you're going to say, and maybe even how to encourage, if you're the interviewer, how to encourage the other person to respond. A lot of those are carryover. It's just a very different format. It's a different format even virtually because it's just one-on-one. So it involves more listening, responding.
Someone wanted to know if you could provide your presentation, the slides.
Yes, we talked about that. Well, it's recorded, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
so it's recorded. Yeah.
Perfect.
And that's fine. I believe the slides are available in a PDF. That's okay. They're on the recording too.
Okay, perfect. And then one last question for everyone's time. Someone wanted to know, do you have any suggestions on how to make the most of a virtual sales call?
Wow. Focusing on the other person and what the experience is like for them, not using filler words, coming across credibly vocally. If I was working with someone on a sales call, we would be very certain about what their first question would be and why. We'd be very certain about what they knew about the company and what they would say about it. We would make sure there were some open-ended questions So I think on a sales call, you take this format, which is a smaller picture of yourself that has to look super confident. Thinking of maybe your favorite newscasters, how they look. They look super confident.
Perfect. And it's 1 o'clock, so I'll be conscious of everyone's time. Cyndi, thank you so, so much for this presentation. This was amazing. I was taking notes myself. We all just want to say thank you, and I hope that everyone else has a great rest of their day.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, Nick, and everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.